The sea, ooh, okay. The sea restored us with its sounds and colors, rhythmical ebb and flow. It stretched far to the horizon and beyond, promising adventures in other lands. Our lives were lived under strict rules imposed by adults, parents, teachers. Sometimes it felt as if any adult passing by could tell us what to do, what we could not do also. At the beach, we were free of adult control. We could play, and most importantly, we could go swimming when we wanted and as often as we chose. Paddling out through shallow water, jumping over curling waves until we reached the place where it was deep enough so that only water was beneath your feet. Then it was time to swim. No thought later when wool swimsuits, waterlogged and heavy, would be crusty with salt and difficult to peel off. Salty seawater buoyed up our bodies when we swam, but it left your skin itchy. Sitting and running around on soft sand pelted our scalp, toes, ears, and noses with pesky yellow granules. Even so, the body glow from swimming and being by the sea felt glorious, a warmth that was more than the heat of the sun. The warmth was in our hearts because for that time, even though short, we were free to please ourselves. As the big sister, I kept a sharp eye on who was where, especially at the beach. Older than my siblings, 7 years between myself and Moira, next in line, I felt responsible for the safety. Beach days, like many other days, were without strict adult supervision, although I had stern instructions from mother to keep an eye on the youngsters. And this I did, bossing everybody vigorously. I'd watch whoever went in for a swim until they emerged from the sea. Often we'd all play in shallow water, but at some point, one or the other of my siblings would take off for a swim in the deep water. My brother always stayed in the longest. Reluctant to leave the sea, he'd ignore my warnings that he'd been in dangerously long. Finally, I'd resort to sharp commands. "John, get out now," I'd yell. "Your lips are blue." "I'm fine." The answer was through chattering lips. "If you don't leave the water this minute," I don't know how I'd have carried out the implied threat, but my shivering brother would grudgingly exit. "Look," Carol, my best friend, was with us that day. "Your sister's waving." I waved back to Moira, who was wading out in search of deeper water. The tide was coming in, and lacy waves trickled up to where Carol and I stood, lapping around our ankles in foam. Casting a quick look back, I saw that Kate was watching John and his friend, who were busy digging a moat around the sandcastle. Turning back, I spotted Moira again. Suddenly, she disappeared. What happened? Moira wasn't a prankster. She wouldn't, oh, good, her head bobbed up again. She's safe. Oh. She sank under the water again. Dismay flooded me. What was happening to my quiet, gentle sister? She loved the ocean and was a good swimmer. Carol and I hit the water at the same time and began swimming frantically out to where we'd last seen my sister. It wasn't far, but something was seriously wrong. My arms, a painful cramp vibrated up one of my legs. My arms alone weren't enough to carry me further. The only way to stop the cramp was to go back and stand on firm land. So I'm going to let you read the rest when you get the book. Oh, sorry, Jan. I'm I'm going to ask if anybody else wants to.
So Hazel, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I missed it or if I'm assuming you are the oldest of the siblings?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. The boss, the
the
sergeant
boss.
major.
Yes, you have to be when you're the oldest, as I
Absolutely.
know. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And actually, looking at everybody here, I know most of you I know have had siblings. So I don't know if you're bosses or not, if you're used to herding the kids around. Does anybody have any experience of that? You have to unmute if you're going to talk. Nope. Okay.
I'll say no. I'll say that my brother, happily, it was very different. I mean, yeah, he was 22 much younger, and so we were buddies. So I didn't have that, but I can see it though for others. I can see that you in that role. It's great. It's great hearing about it and reading about it. I mean, well, hearing this.
Great, great. Thank you, Amy. You made it. Wonderful.
Yeah, I've been here, but just in the background, you know.
Right. And did you hear that Lisa said there will be a recording? So Alex will be able to.
Yeah, she's on, but I think she was having trouble with her computer. But I just sent her an invitation, so anyway.
Just to clarify, as I sent a message out at the beginning, the recording button decided not to play well with others at the beginning, so I missed the first 15 or 20 minutes. But once you all heard that, we are now recording. We are now recording. So my apologies for the vagaries of the technology, but we are in fact now recording.
Okay, great.
And Hazel, this is not a question, but in the pause, I just want to express how wonderful it is to see you and to hear your story. And you seem full of energy. You are glowing, and what a gift you're giving us. Thank you.
Is that Inga?
No, Adele. Mount Toby.
Oh, there. Wait a minute. I'm trying to see Adele. Okay. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hey.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, I did mention that my neighbor upstairs wants the sequel, and oh golly. So it's would you like me to read something else, or would you like me to read the rest of the story about the summer day?
I'd like to hear a little bit more about the summer day, and then something about some other, when you lived in another place, maybe, like, or whatever you care to share in any order, but yeah.
Right. I have to find the book. Oh gosh.
Oh, I have it right here. No, it's
All righty. Let's see. Well, yes, I think because it was another summer day. All right. So Carol and I started swimming, and I had to go back. Paddling awkwardly in place, fear filled me. I was certain Moira had been waving for help. Why else would she have done that? I strained to see Carol, who had just reached where we last saw Moira. One dive and Carol quickly surfaced, holding Moira. Well done, I called out in relief. Crabbing my way back to the shore, where the others stood in an anxious line, I pushed my foot flat on the sand, wincing at the painful spasm that ended the cramp. What happened? John asked. Not sure. She'll be fine. I added confidence to my tone, though I felt anything but confident. There were welcome splashing sounds when Carol reached the shore. Slowly, panting, she stood, holding Moira. My heart sank. Moira was unconscious. Apprehension filled me. Carefully, Carol placed my sister in my arms. Cramp? She said. Right. Carol and I had been friends for years and played on the same teams in school. More words weren't needed. Reaching the shore, I lay Moira's limp body down on her back. Her eyes were shut and her face deathly pale. Still gulping in air, Carol dropped to the sand. Everybody was staring at me, waiting for me to help Moira. They were relying on me, and I never felt less reliable. I didn't dare look at anyone, worried the terror in my eyes would show. You have to press on the stomach, I said, sounding as if I knew what I needed to do. Carol sucked in her breath, but she didn't speak. At the start of summer, one of her sisters had signed up for a first aid course and promised to let us know how to help if someone was drowning. That part of the course hadn't been reached yet. I was on my own. Bending over Moira, I pushed both hands on her rib cage. About to press down again, a shadow fell across my sister's body and I hesitated. Here, let me, someone said. How long was she underwater? Not long, Carol said. Scrambling out of the way, I watched a woman, swimsuit dripping water, bend over Moira. She turned Moira's head to the side and placed her hands on Moira's chest. The stranger pressed down again, paused for a second, arms straight, pressed again and again. Moira spluttered and water dribbled, then gushed out of her mouth. Her eyes fluttered open and she stared up at the woman. Moira's hair and eyelashes were sodden with seawater, but I could see the golden flecks in her eyes and puzzlement. What? Moira asked, her voice scratchy. More water trickled out of the side of her mouth. You went under. Carol rescued you, I said shakily, joy mixed with fear. Moira was alive. Would she be all right? How would we know? She'll be fine, the woman said. She stood and walked away before I could thank her. Moira coughed and her body shook in a frightening spasm. She struggled to sit. Here, John brought water. Carol and I eased Moira up, and I stroked her cold arms. Kate brought her towel and wrapped it around Moira. Gradually, my sister's breathing eased. It felt like an eternity before the color started to return to her face. How do you feel? I asked. Better. Who was that? I don't know. I stared down the beach. In the distance, I could see a solitary figure walking close to where the promenade ended. The beach was almost empty. What if the stranger hadn't walked by? It didn't bear thinking about. Together, we four survived. We even prevailed over the magnificent dysfunction of home life. Together, we became our own protection. The water wasn't even up to my waist, but I must have stepped in the hole. All of a sudden, I was in my head and I dropped like a stone. Moira shivered, a shiver that ran through all of us. I kicked back to the surface and I shouted, but I swallowed water and her voice trailed off. I stifled a sob. My sister was alive. She was going to be all right. Would I be when Mother found out? We didn't pack up for a while, taking time to shake sand from our towels and stow belongings in the bags until I could see that Moira was ready to make the trip home. It was slow going up the zigzag. Moira had no energy. We'd stop now and then and she'd catch her breath, and I was worried as she leaned against the wall, face drained again of color. Was she really going to be all right? What were we going to do when Mother found out? Would she lash out at Moira? Would we all be punished? Mother's fury was dangerously close to the surface in the best of times. Thoughts circled in my head. And by the time we reached Carol's home, I'd found a decision. We stood in a tight circle in the driveway, and I hugged Carol close. Then I took a deep breath. Time to tell the others what I had decided. Carol, you saved Moira. I'll always be grateful, but I'm worried about what mother would do if she ever knew. I think we have to keep this secret. True, Carol agreed without hesitation. We'd never get to the beach again. Can you imagine what my mother would say if she found out? I know. I didn't want to think about our mothers. None of us would be spared. This would go so far beyond normal displeasure. I quaked at the possibility. Okay, here's what I'm thinking we have to do, I warned the group. No one says anything about this, not one word to anyone. It's got to be a secret, otherwise we'll all be in terrible trouble. I waited for this to sink in, and then I added the final persuasion. It wouldn't just be the worst telling off ever. We'd never be allowed to go to the beach by ourselves, and there's no one else to take us. Nods of agreement. Everyone was silent. My siblings knew in their hearts that we would avoid major problems if we kept quiet. Are you okay with this, Moira? I asked. You're right, my sister agreed wearily. I don't want to deal with mother. She'd fly off the handle. John's friend headed off and we four trudged home. We were quiet, stunned by a summer day that careened so quickly into trouble. What if Carol hadn't rescued Moira? What if the stranger hadn't walked by? We must never tell. It was safer that way. At least I'd seen resuscitation and I knew what to do now, if there was another time. Days passed. We tiptoed around mother, extra careful about what we said, straining to squash memories of Moira disappearing under the waves. Are you feeling okay now? I asked Moira one morning at breakfast, and I jumped guiltily when mother walked in. What's wrong? What is it, Moira? Mother had overheard my question. Moira felt tired when she got up, I said hastily. Mother took a sharp look at Moira, who muttered, I'm fine, and bent her head over her bowl of Weetabix. We skidded around other near misses and slips. You coughed up a lot of water, John teased Moira. His back was to the door, and he didn't see Mother coming into the room. He was about to say something else when I jumped in quickly before trouble was caused. When you drank too quickly out of the Tizer bottle, I said, forcing a laugh. We're a success, John said one day on the way to the beach. He didn't need to say anything else. We knew what he meant. For a few minutes, we joked about what had happened, as if it hadn't been frighteningly close to tragedy. Gradually, the fear that our secret would be discovered slid deep into the recesses of our mind, until the day when Mother called me in from the garden. She was in the kitchen, face tight with anger. What happened the other week at the beach? What? I stammered. Did she know? John walked into the kitchen and Mother repeated the question. Now she was furious. Oh, we're all fine, John said breezily. That wasn't good enough for Mother. Her eyes narrowed and she inhaled heavily on her Piccadilly cigarette. We waited nervously. I was in the front garden just now when a woman biking by stopped and asked about my daughter. She brought grapes. Mother waved dismissively at a small bag lying on the table. When I said you girls were all fine, she said, I meant the one who almost drowned. That was it. Our secret was out. Who was it? Mother demanded. Who almost drowned? Words poured out of me in a frantic stream. Moira, it was Moira. She wasn't far out, but she stepped in a hole and went under, and Carol brought her back to shore. John added, some woman walking by stopped to help. We didn't know her, and she left when she saw Moira was all right. We waited. What now? Mother glowered at us, ground the stub of her cigarette into an ashtray. Picking up her Piccadillys, she tapped out another cigarette. The silence was excruciating. What was going through her head? I bit my lip. Whatever I said, it wouldn't help now. I hoped Mother was considering we were all healthy, that Moira hadn't had one of her migraines that kept her in bed for days or more. Moira didn't even have the sniffles. We were all fine. Finally, her voice cold, Mother spoke. I will go to Carol's. My heart sank. Now Carol's mother would know. I kept my silence. Nothing I could say would change Mother's mind. Apprehensively, I waited for punishment. Get out of my sight. Mother turned away. That was it. No more questions. No punishment. The burden of secrecy was lifted. We weren't forbidden to go to the beach again. Were we extra careful, or were we just plain lucky after that? Never again did we experience any difficulties, just the occasional case of sunburn. We moved through summer in this familiar way, enjoying the beach and freedom. Home, we'd rinse our swimsuits and drape them outside on the clothesline. The salt smell wafted through the house, calling us back to the beach. Our resilience amazes me as I think back to that day. My siblings and I sometimes talk about it. Any discussion starts the day when Moira nearly drowned. For the rest of that summer and the summers that followed, I still made sandwiches and packed our bags. We still walked to the beach. We still ignored the water wings we were told we had to use. We still played on the sand and we swam whenever we felt like swimming. Tragedy had been averted. The fact that we were even allowed to go to the beach without an adult is incredible to me, even so long after that terrible day. To the casual observer, we were a lively group, always out and about. What happened that day on the beach will stay with me forever, just as years later, the death of Dad in a fire that destroyed our Tucton home is forever in my mind, despite my hazy memory. So
Wow,
there you have it, friends.
that's an incredible story. How old was Maura when that happened, Hazel? This is Mary.
Right. I think, let me see. John, do you remember, is John still there? Oh, my brother gave up. John?
I'm here. No, I'm here, but my memory is is more hazy than yours, Hazel.
No, you
I-
can't claim that.
I would think probably you were about 11, something like that, 12.
No. I was 14, 15. So I guess if we take, if we say I was 15, if we take 7 from 15, anybody got the answer?
Eight.
Thank you. We have a math expert. All
Oh,
right.
wow. Wow, what an impression that must have made on her. And she's not afraid of water since?
No. She goes swimming all the time and she's a
Right.
good swimmer. And you know, I've stepped in holes like that. And the key is you keep your mouth shut when you come up. You don't say help and swallow water. But yeah, so that was, it was quite an experience. And I imagine that none of us is going to forget that quickly. So, but it's so wonderful to see everybody. And Greenfield Library has, and Lisa, I really thank you so much for the opportunity to share with friends. Lovely to see Adele also, and to see Inga Briga, a Quaker friend
Hi
of mine.
there, Hazel. It's so good to see you from, I think must be about 30 or 25 years ago that we saw each other last.
Oh
I
my,
know.
And you're
I
still
know.
the same wonderful person. Yes.
Well, we have a few Quakers. We have Carol Cohen, we have Carol Letson, we have Mary Ellen and John, Inga Briga from Michigan, Adele from Wendell. So it's a sort of old folks day, isn't it? Or young folks day, young folks day. catching myself.
Hazel?
Quickly. Yes.
Hazel, it's Lynn Page. I'd like to hear, where were you during the war?
Where was I during the war? I was in Southbourne, in Tuckton, actually. And it's amazing to me because when I started researching, I had the story that I had written, everything in the memoir is true. And the story that I had written for the Equinox, for Maureen Moore's magazine, is about a German spy in Southbourne. And the amazing thing to me is that my mother somehow managed that I didn't know anything about the bombing. Bournemouth had a lot of bombing, and the only time I heard about the bombing was when they caught the spy, the German spy, because there'd obviously been intelligence, foreign intelligence. Bournemouth is a seaside resort, and it had wonderful hotels, it still does. And the biggest hotel in Bournemouth was full of military on R&R, and they were bombed, and it was very specifically espionage. And when I learned about the bombing of the hotel, as far as I knew, when I was, at that time I was 6, as far as I knew, that was the only bombing Bournemouth had. In actual fact, they had hundreds of bombing, and there was even one occasion when the Brits bombed dams in Germany, and in retaliation, it is thought in retaliation, the Germans, they did bomb Bournemouth, but they strafed. They flew across the pleasure gardens, beautiful pleasure gardens in Bournemouth. There's a little stream that runs down to the ocean, and they machine gunned all of the people that they could see. And there were children, women, children, and there were a few military. So, war is such that it's all fury and revenge. So, as I say, somehow my mother protected me from learning about most of what was going on. And all I knew was that we would have my grandmother, my one grandparent, would come down from Southampton, which had non-stop bombing. And she wouldn't stay because she wanted to go back to Southampton. And then Great Aunt Alice, who ran a pub in London, which was very busy despite the bombing, she would come and visit, and she would be the same. After a day, she'd say, well, I have to get back home now. It just, looking back, it amazes me that they didn't all want to come to places that weren't bombed regularly. But the more I think about it, I think it's when we have a place that we call home, even if it is under fire, even if it is dangerous, we tend to want to be there. So that's the
Is this story part of in your book, in your memoir? Anything about it?
Actually, the first chapter is, I call it Out is Low and Slow, because I would ask my mother, why do the planes at night, why do they go so slow, and why do they sound so loud? And then before dawn, they come back and they're high and they're quick. And that's when I learned about bombing. We were bombing, the Brits were bombing, and the Germans were bombing. Everybody bombed as much as they could. So, and of course, people making the munitions are really the ones that we should focus on, to ask them not to make munitions. So, but yes, that was my experience of war, and then with my various relatives. And then later on, much as I like company, I would also like to go out by myself, and I would go exploring. And Hengistbury Head is where the Romans first came ashore in South England, and it was covered with, it was still, even though they had technically cleaned it up, it was littered with mines and other debris. So Yes, I have a writing companion here who has written a book called The History of Tupton, The History of Tupton from 35,000 BC to 1926. And he has shared photos with me of the debris that was left in Hengistbury Head. And there I was tootling over it, luckily safely. So, but even now they find bombs and other military equipment umpteen years after the war. So friends, we're getting close to the end. So you have to quickly, if you have any questions.
I have a question, Hazel, because you've
Yeah.
lived in so many places. So what's the quick rundown? So you're born in England or whatever, United Kingdom, Great Britain, something like that. Okay, and then what's the chronology and the dates real quickly?
Oh, I will now plead hazy memory.
Okay, yeah, or just roughly.
I worked in London, then I worked in I should really look at the book, shouldn't I? All I can tell you is, chronologically speaking, I worked in Geneva, then I went back to London, then I worked in France, and then I went to the US. Probably my work in London was the most interesting because I worked after the death of my father, I was back home and I ended up working for our local member of parliament, Bournemouth East. He actually turned out to be a crook. And after a few months, I decided that I really couldn't tolerate this. Mostly it's because sometimes we would have a weekend at his country house and he had young children, and his nanny told me that she'd been promised that she would be in the London house more than the country house. And she said, they won't let me go to London. I have to stay with the children by myself in the isolation of country, and they won't give me a reference. I'll never get another job. That did it for me. I was treated well, but I gave up and I left, and I got a job with the Evening Standard with the financial manager, who committed suicide, not because I was working for him, I want you to know. He was such a nice man. And it was only the financial manager for the Evening Standard. Well, sorry, he was the financial analyst of the stock market for the Evening Standard. And his best friend was the deputy editor. And after Jeremy died, Derek Marks, the deputy editor, called me up and he said, well, I suspect you don't have a job any longer. So I said, yes. He said, would you like to come and work for me? You come well recommended. So I said, okay. So I ended up working at the Evening Standard, and that was a trip because everybody who was anybody came in to visit Derek Marks. Sometimes they came looking for information. Sometimes they came sharing information. I think my most favorite person was, Hazy Memory. Who wrote?
Ian Fleming.
Thank you. Who said that? Yes, he had the best manners. He would come in to visit Derek regularly and always was so courteous and kind and beautifully dressed. So that was always fun to meet and see him. And then I got a job in France, which is a very romantic city, as you know. And that's where I met my first husband. And that's how I ended up in the US. So
What year was that, Hazel?
I can remember this. It was December 1960 or 61.
That you came to the US?
Yes. So I'd actually lived more of my life in the US than in England. So I have to live another 60 years so I can make up that gap.
That makes perfect sense. So Hazel, after listening to all of this, I am adding my voice to the "so when is the sequel coming out" list of questions.
Ah,
And with the added promise that you will do another one of these sessions for us when it does. Or as
thank you.
Marjorie just said, if you heard it, or even before. For
Well, you
those
know-
of you who are interested, we do have local people who are interested. We do have 2 copies of Hazel's book here in the collection. It is already cataloged and it is available for checkout.
Is it
Wonderful,
available to
wonderful.
purchase?
Sorry?
Is it available to purchase?
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to run right over, Laurie, and give you one. Actually, World Eye will have some copies.
Yeah, good.
And federal books will have some copies. But you can also buy, if you don't mind working with the dreaded Amazon, you can buy, it's Kindle and it's paperback. So it makes a wonderful gift, just imagine. Oh, so
Do we-
good to see everybody.
Do we know when World Eye will have the book?
Well, they were posted, I think 10 days ago. So it takes a little while for Amazon to print the copies, and there will be a freebie waiting for Mary Claire Powell because it's her fault.
Yeah.
And there's a freebie for Faith Kindness because it's equally her fault. But you know, the interesting thing is that I asked Mary Claire Powell, I said, look, this is what I'm thinking to do for the Zoom. And there's a story that isn't in the book. And she said, no story that isn't in the book. But maybe that'll be part of the sequel because it's a very funny story. And it only was left out because I have a hazy memory and I forgot about it.
So Mary Claire, since your memoir writing group has spawned such a great response, when we have the new library and we can have meetings again, can we tap you to do the class again? Possibly? You're muted. Oh, hold on, you're still muted. Let me see if I can take care of that for you. There we go.
I don't want to wait that long, Lisa. I would like to start up a class while the old library is still going.
Yes, unfortunately, we have no meeting rooms. So unless we can manage it virtually.
No, we managed it. We found rooms in the community at the First Congregational Church, for example. So
excellent.
That was fantastic.
If you get another class going, let us know. We will help with the advertising.
Okay, great.
Yeah, highly recommended. Highly recommended.
Absolutely. Fabulous. Yes.
And the YMCA might have a space for you to teach a class.
Yeah, great.
The YMCA.
Thanks. I've been wanting to start it up again.
That would be lovely. That would be lovely.
Wonderful.
Divine.
Thank you so much, Hazel. It's great to see your face.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you all. Just wonderful.
Yeah.
And thank you, Lisa and Greenfield Public Library. Just a fabulous library. Let me assure you, the libraries here are so on a budget. There's no, I mean, the librarians are wonderful, but there's no comparison. You're very fortunate, friends, very fortunate.
Well, we are absolutely thrilled to have had Hazel with us today. And as I said, most of the recording will be available on our Facebook page probably in the next couple of days. I've got to find out where I ended up saving it to. And we look forward to having Hazel back. And again, thank you to the Friends of the Greenfield Public Library for sponsoring our Zoom session so we could do this. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah,
wonderful to see you face to face, Hazel. We've missed
Thank you. Yes. I'll be back when COVID is good.
Yay.
Yay, yeah. And I'm coming over to go into the ocean regardless.
Excellent, excellent. Everybody's invited, but not all at the same time.
Well, have a lovely day, everyone. And thank you all for joining us.
It's good seeing all these wonderful neighbors.